Hey guys, what's going on? Lane back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Hand of God. The Hand of God is an Italian drama that tells the story of Fabietto, a teenager growing up in 1980s Naples in Italy. He lives an ordinary life as a high school student, has a close relationship with his entire family, especially his parents, and mostly spends his time listening to music and watching football games of his favorite player, Diego Maradona. Fabietto spends the majority of his time with a variety of family members living as carefree as can be when a tragedy occurs in the family that forces him to reevaluate his life circumstances. This results in an abrupt coming of age while he tries to make sense of his newfound adulthood. This was definitely one of the more interesting films I watched this year. Although it's not as straightforward as your typical drama, I found myself intrigued by its setting, characters, and variety of themes that are present throughout the story. Now, while I didn't find myself blown away by it compared to others who've seen it, I still couldn't help but be fascinated at how much stuff the movie juggles and how well, for the most part, that it all comes together. Much of it is thanks to its lead character, Fabietto. Fabietto has a lot of details to unpack, so as far as characters are concerned, I'm mostly going to focus on him. What I found interesting about him from the start is how unconcerned he is about his future. He has vague aspirations of studying philosophy and hanging out with his family, but not much else in the way of life goals. Then, when the tables are turned, Fabietto is faced with a harsh reality that completely overturns his perspective on life, going so far as to be disenchanted with reality altogether. He soon becomes distant from people he used to associate with and shifts his focus from philosophy to filmmaking. I think Fabietto's behavior in response to the tragedy that occurs in his family is believable in its presentation, and his actor does a great job at communicating the frustration that he undergoes. There's a powerful scene where he vents at his circumstances, and it's fittingly placed at the halfway point in the movie. This scene is the perfect transition for his character. It highlights the peak of his immaturity while serving as a jumping pad for his adulthood to be launched from. Before and after this moment, there are plenty of examples that show the amount of growing up he really has to do. In terms of what happens before, there's his general ambivalence and always heeding the words of his parents who he has a close relationship with, like I mentioned earlier. There's little bits of advice that they'll give him, and he acts on this advice later on in the story, which signifies the growth that he's experiencing, even if it's only a little bit. I really like that this continuity is set in place. No scene of dialogue goes to waste, as one line usually has to do with another thing that happens later in the story. It forced me to pay careful attention to what characters were saying, and it was rewarding to recall details as Fabietto started to apply them from his past to his future. And speaking of the future, or what happens after, this is something that becomes particularly important in the latter half of the film. Fabietto's world has been turned upside down, and he finally has to ask himself where he goes from here. This is where I started to notice a lot of his sexual maturity come into play as he proceeds to lose his virginity. Once again, he recalls advice given to him by his father, and he actually applies it in a manner that I really did not expect. Although a bit weird at first, it actually ended up being one of the more poignant scenes in the film for me. It represents another stepping stone for Fabietto in crossing over to adulthood. He can finally scratch his first time off the list and can move on from being so obsessed with sex and focus on what he's going to make out of his future. There were a lot of sexual themes present throughout the story in general, especially involving Fabietto's aunt Patrizia. She's the complete opposite of him in terms of maturity, and this is reflected on Fabietto as well due to suggestive incidents occurring between them before the tragedy takes place, which provides a hint of what's to come for him later on. But by far, the biggest influence on Fabietto concerns the football player Diego Maradona, who was traded to the Napoli Football Club. He's revered in an almost godlike manner, not just by Fabietto, but also the Italian population at large, which is fitting not just for the goal he makes where the movie gets its name from, but also the subliminal role he plays in Fabietto's journey to adulthood. Without giving away any spoilers, Maradona is what motivated Fabietto to go in his life path while others go their way. This can be inferred as the hand of God itself steering Fabietto onto the path he needs to walk on, and in fact is directly referred to as such by another character. It took me a while to understand how the connection was made, but eventually it made sense. Maradona's influence on Fabietto is almost invisible, which parallels the fact that Maradona's goal had hand-to-ball contact which went unseen by referees. It was a masterstroke in how the film used a simple event like watching a football game change the course of Fabietto's life story. Regarding his later interest in film, this was the only area that I felt required more explanation. He's made out to be clearly passionate about film and wants to make a career out of it, but there's only like 2 scenes or so where he moves in that direction. There's just not much justification that warrants him being so dedicated to this area. This being said though, there is a recurring motif I liked where he wants to watch a copy of the movie Once Upon a Time in America. He never gets around to it, but it's actually a good thing because it signifies that he's already happy with the narrative of his family life, and when tragedy does strike, he can't bring himself to watch it because it reminds him of what happened. Honestly, there is so much more to this film, I'm barely scraping the surface. Apparently, much of it was inspired from the life of the director himself, which I can definitely see in hindsight. It's clear that a lot of care went into crafting every single nuance that went into the making of it. The way it recreates 1980s Naples as its setting makes the story come to life. People drive old cars, watch programs on vintage TVs, and attend dilapidated schools. The movie has an intentionally dated look to it that enhanced its atmosphere, as well as signifying Fabietto's journey from the old and familiar to the new and unknown. The reality of life in Naples doesn't look particularly pleasant, though Fabietto doesn't notice this until later in the film. His family members mask this reality for him through their wacky personalities and off-kilter dialogue. Every so often, someone will say or do something completely ridiculous, which results in everyone bursting out into laughter. I do think that some of these scenes are really funny, especially the ones involving the man with the voice box, but sometimes they can be a bit excessive. Since it's supposed to be sort of based on the director, I'm not sure how much of the silly stuff is authentic to his own personal experiences. And to be fair, I'm not Italian myself, so there may be a cultural difference in there somewhere too. I can't speak as to whether or not casual swearing or insults are this common, but insofar as the movie is concerned, it tended to create tonal shifts in the story that felt weird to me. On another note, I would have liked to see Fabietto's arc change just a bit sooner than it did. I know I praised the movie earlier for its use of the halfway point, but I felt that I'd already gotten a sense of what Fabietto was like before reaching it, and would have appreciated more time getting to know his new personality after the tragedy unfolds. The general style of the film does help to uplift it where it counts though. The minimalistic use of a soundtrack and frequent use of panning shots helps the audience stay focused on the actions and reactions of characters, which is beneficial for a dialogue-heavy film like this. Overall, The Hand of God is a moving drama that explores the tumultuous life of a boy who doesn't realize he's about to become a man, who needs to find out for himself what kind of man he needs to become, and how he will do so. If you enjoy family-oriented dramas and you're looking for one that has a ton of themes and motifs to pick away from, you should definitely check out this one. It has something for everyone in its analysis of careers, love, sports, family, and life purpose. There were some issues regarding tonal shifts and certain narrative decisions, but Fabietto's story kept me invested to the very end, just as his hero Maradona did for others all those years ago. Anyways guys, that's going to wrap up my review of The Hand of God. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the nature documentary, Puff, Wonders of the Reef. Bye bye!